Have you ever experienced culture shock? I remember going to Thailand and I got on a bus and I got off at the stop before the stop I was meant to, so I was really in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea where I was. There wasn't any other buses. I was in the middle of the countryside. Some children were screaming "Falang, Falang, Falang," which means white woman, white woman, white woman, or white man, white man, white man. So obviously this wasn't a tourist area. And I found what I thought might be a hotel, but I wasn't sure if it was a brothel. And so I knew that it wasn't uncommon, apparently, for people to spike the food and then they drug you and rape you. This is when I was in my early 20s when I was there. And someone brought a plate of salad, really nice looking salad, to my door. And I just felt maybe I shouldn't eat it because I didn't know what it was, or if they'd spiked it or where I was. And I went for a walk and I went to what I thought might be a restaurant, and I sat down and I asked them for I tried to use my Thai and asked them for some prawns and rice. And then they brought me something which was very hard to eat. I don't know what it was, but I realised I was probably in someone's home. And I just kind of walked into someone's house on a veranda and asked them for a plate of prawns and rice. And the whole thing was very surreal and disorientating. And thankfully I got on a bus the next day. But actually it was a time when I was really quite scared because I really didn't know if someone was just going to come in. There wasn't a lock on the door. You could kind of lock the door, but the key was on the outside. Which was very strange. So I had a Bible with me and I just turned to it and read it until I fell asleep, and it was Romans. I'm not sure I took much in, but I just kept reading the Bible. So it was a really interesting experience. But culture shock, as here, I hate this culture. It's when you look at life and the experiences all around you, and it all seems negative to you. It just seems terrible. You can't cope with it. Everything's hard. Nothing is the way you thought it was. And what was normal is not normal anymore. And everything's a challenge. And when we leave what we're used to, what we're comfortable to, and we go into this alien culture, we can get culture shock. Initially there will be this honeymoon period, which is often it's called that, where everything's wonderful and new and we embrace it. And then we kind of go into this shock of actually what we're in. So, what is culture shock? There's climate. What once was familiar with your climate might become completely unfamiliar and uncomfortable. If you're used to a temperate climate and you go somewhere where it's 40 degrees or 50 degrees centigrade, or 30 degrees and incredibly humid, and you feel uncomfortable all the time, this can start to be irritating. Food is another. Everything's alien. You can't get what you like. It might all be rice, nothing but rice, or for Koreans in a Western country, it's all bread, nothing but bread. Where's our rice? There might be nothing we find that we like. It's all kind of trying to chew our way through something that tastes unnormal, and nothing's comforting. We can sometimes find it comfort in going to a cafe, just sitting down, relaxing, having a coffee and a cinnamon roll, and we can't do that anymore. We have a bowl of rice. The language, whether it's unspoken or spoken, we can think what people are saying with unspoken language, and it might not be, but we might think they're always thinking negatively of us, or we're challenged with a language. Someone talks to us and we can't reply back. No one speaks our language in any way. You can't relate to anyone. You feel ignored. You feel isolated because you can't relate to anyone. Everyone's chatting together in their group and they don't talk back to you. I know when I was in the West Indies, everyone spoke English, but they would talk this native language and I couldn't understand it, so they were all together in a group and they'd all talk together in their language, and so I felt a bit isolated. There's clothing. Often we will need to adapt to clothing and not wear what we're usually comfortable in, and this might feel uncomfortable and alien, and after a while we just don't feel we are who we are. And then there's values, which is a strong one. All our values, all our values that we have to either fight, we might not be able to hold on to in order to fit into the culture that we're now in. We have to keep looking at what we value and whether it's really valuable. We might value a flush toilet, and every day having to go to a hole in the ground somewhere and feeling disorientated and uncomfortable, and those are little things, but there's every step is hard. And then there's the etiquette and behaviour and trying to fit in, and their culture. And eventually we have culture shock. And we scream, I hate this culture, I want to go home. And it might not be as bad as that. If we're on a DTS outreach, hopefully we're with other people who are similar to us and we have leaders who can help us. But if we're a long-term missionary somewhere, we will probably experience this, and it will be hard. What do you think are the symptoms of culture shock?
Isolation. You stop going out as much because you don't want to keep experiencing the culture.
Or it might just be that there is nowhere to go, you're not invited anywhere, or you don't know how to be. And so you are isolated. Yeah, it's a really good one.
I would say out of that, then probably loneliness.
Yeah.
Depression, probably, to some degree.
Yeah.
Bitterness, resentment, hatred. And you just start comparing. You notice a lot of people do that when they're experiencing that. They just go, well, we did it this way, and that becomes more and more common.
Yeah. And judging.
Yeah.
What else?
Being anxious. Being anxious.
Anxious, yeah.
I don't know if that is on there or if that is just ineffectiveness, just not wanting to do what you're doing. But I don't know how you would necessarily write that. What the emotion behind it is withdrawal or
Apathy.
yeah.
I think what's important to recognise is that this is normal. And I think when we recognise that, then that's really helpful. I went to boarding school when I was 8, and I would say when I went to boarding schools, I probably had some sort of culture shock because I left my home, my parents, and as a child I was sent off to an alien environment. And lots of children would be crying and they'd be very homesick when they arrived, and they would have to learn to adapt at a young age. And although it wasn't called that, I'd probably suggest that there is some kind of culture shock and adaptation that the children need to make. And it would happen every time they went home and every time they had to go back to school.
Were you in England?
I was in England.
In England, was it like a different culture of England, like the teachers and stuff? Because I know like there's a good amount of different cultures in England.
I think it was just the culture shock of being in a home environment with parents and siblings and animals, and then going into a whole different environment with teachers and regulations. And one school I went, it was very big, so there were lots of people, and I felt very isolated and alone and depressed and all those kind of things, because I had to try and adapt to fit in, which at a young age isn't very healthy when you're a child. Because children, especially if they go from one school in one country to another school in another country, again, that's quite a leap. Refugees, they will be in great culture shock. Not only do they have the horror of the war or the reason why they have come to a certain country, but then they have the shock of actually fitting in. And biblically, it says to welcome the alien, and you can see why. The value of why that was. It was to integrate them into society, be with them, actually help see the wisdom, help them to fit in. Otherwise, if they're in a culture and they're just in their own culture, in an alien culture, and no one's helping them, then it causes resentment. They go through all this culture shock and they can end up never fitting in, but actually just being with their own people in another culture. And that's often what happens when refugees come in.
So I feel like that's the hard thing as missionaries. You can't sort of make a pocket of your culture and do your job at the same time. Like, does that make any sense?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I can't bring America to Turkey and Azerbaijan and bring like a group of 20 and say we're going to live as Americans and do missions.
You kind of need to integrate.
I think that's the hard part of being a missionary.
Yeah, there's been a lot of harm done by people who haven't integrated, and now we've learned from that we really do need to integrate. And Hudson Taylor was someone in China who really integrated into society and dressed like that. Whereas a lot of other missionaries went out and they still dressed in their own dress. They didn't, and they taught people time and the Bible. Yeah. So if you have culture stress, then it lasts longer. and it really zaps you of all energy, and you'll feel really discouraged. Have you experienced, let's look at the common symptoms. The common symptoms of culture shock. So you'll have anxiety, depression, loneliness, being homesick, disturbed sleep patterns, remoteness or isolation, decreased productivity, poor time management, and you could have drastic personality changes. So we really covered most of that, but the important thing, as I'll keep mentioning, is that we actually know this and acknowledge it, and so that when we're in a country, or if we're in a country and we experience this, if we can think, I have culture shock, then we know it's not going to last and we can actually do something about it. I can give you this PowerPoint.
That second photo of the kid just makes me think, like, the first sleepover you have is a culture shock. Like, the fact that kids sometimes don't want to stay over at a friend's house because it's a different family culture. It's the same thing. It's like, this isn't how I operate. This isn't how my parents operate. I kind of want to be here right now.
Yeah.
I never really thought of that, like, in that way before. So that's cool.
Yeah. Whereas often it's a honeymoon period too. But they might really miss their mum and everything that they're used to. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And reverse culture shock will be when you return home and you get culture shock. And so you're unprepared for the familiar as you've experienced something different. When I went to Australia, I went away for 9 months. I went to Australia for 6 months, and then I came back, and I came back via Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand and India. And when I returned back to my friends, it was like they were all the same. Nothing had changed. They were talking about what they were talking about when I left. And I felt that I'd changed so much, and I'd experienced so much, and I'd seen all this poverty in India, and then I come back to London and there's so much riches. And I'm sure you've experienced something like that.